Okay, so this is a short lecture on community participation. I'm going to kind of focus on community mobility and primarily public transportation for a couple of reasons. One, a lot of your typical development you have covered with some of your typical development presentations. There's a section on IEDLs and instrumental activities of daily living. And AOTA within the last maybe 5 or so years, it's probably been longer than that, has really emphasized or has wanted to emphasize the importance of public transportation. And so with that, our accrediting body, ACOTE, has included a standard on having students access or understand what public transportation is all about, in hopes that as you move forward and become occupational therapists, that you take into consideration the use of public transportation. And when you're working with your clients with physical disabilities and cognitive disabilities, what can you do as a therapist to facilitate their independence using public transportation? If they use public transportation, they'll increase their community participation, their socialization, and their overall occupational performance, which increases their overall well-being. So let's get to it. First, I'd like to just review the instrumental activities of daily living. This includes more complex aspects of daily living. Primarily, youth develop IADLs as they're reaching adolescence, and they begin to participate in the community in which they reside with more autonomy or with more independence. So think back to when you were growing up and when you were reaching adolescence, that 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old when you're in high school, and some of the things that you're participating in, whether it be in the school, whether it be in the community, how you navigated those, okay? IDLs include care of other people, care of pets, child rearing, use of communication devices, being able to manage your finances, aspects of your home, being able to manage your health, being able to prepare meals and clean up after yourself, engage in shopping, take care of safety or follow any emergency procedures, and community mobility is a piece of all that. There's a strong relationship between IEDLs and community participation, because if we look at your IEDLs, like maybe financial management, there are some times you may have to run to the bank, right? Your health management and maintenance, there are times when you need to make appointments for yourself and go visit the doctor. There are times when you may have to go to a pharmacy. There are times when you may want to go to a nutrition store, those kinds of things. Shopping, okay, it's you may have to access your community to go shopping. So again, there's that strong relationship between these particular IEDLs and going out in your community, right? There are so many things that we can do virtually nowadays, accessing online banking and those kinds of things, but there still is that community piece where you may have to leave your home at some point or another and physically go to some of these places. By being independent with your IEDLs, it promotes self-determination, being self-sufficient. It increases or promotes your health, as well as social participation. Okay, so when you're accessing your community, when you're engaging in community mobility, a lot of times you're having to engage socially. Right? When you're going to your health appointments, your physicals, you're promoting health. When you are Going to the bank, you're becoming more self-sufficient. Okay, so again, your IADLs help promote self-determination, being self-sufficient, your health, as well as social participation. So, looking at common challenges that stand in people's way when wanting to engage in community participation, there's physical disabilities, and then there's intellectual cognitive impairments. And so physical disabilities, maybe a broken leg, maybe a broken arm, maybe somebody in a wheelchair, okay? They lack the opportunity to directly or to direct their health care, or they lack the opportunity to access their health care. So if they're in a wheelchair, they may not be able to get to their physician or to get to a specialist, something like that. Somebody with a physical disability may be more dependent with shopping, okay, going to the grocery store, carrying around or pushing a cart, those kinds of things. They're more dependent with cleaning, with laundry, and again, they're more dependent accessing public transportation. And we'll visit a little bit more about that as we move forward. Your intellectual cognitive impairments, this may be somebody with a traumatic brain injury, it may be somebody with autism. Again, there may be that intellectual or cognitive impairment. You may have somebody with intellectual impairment, with Down syndrome, a genetic condition, those kinds of things. So they often lack opportunities to engage in shopping or household tasks. In other words, there may be people that just do it for them, whether it be their parents, whether it be caregivers, those kinds of things. They also lack opportunities to engage in various community activities as well as leisure. They can't get out. They may not understand how to go out and engage with other people or use certain resources. And so interestingly enough, there's been studies done, and caregivers of children who experience both intellectual impairments or cognitive disabilities and physical disabilities have more barriers to community participation. Their barriers may be the actual physical environment. Okay, so when we go back up to accessing public transportation, do they have steps to get into the bus, right? Your social environment, so engaging with other people. Maybe the social environment isn't conducive to somebody with autism who has that communication delay or communication issue or anxiety. Okay, there may not be understanding individuals around there. And also lack of resources for families. Okay, that may be just a lack of awareness. We go back up to physical disabilities, and as we move forward, the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title IV, those kinds of things are present in your public transportation because it's a public service, and so they may not know what kinds of resources there are with using public transportation, so they may avoid that altogether. So again, that lack of resources, that lack of awareness. If we look at typical development, and I find this fascinating growing up in the upper Midwest here, particularly with community mobility, because I know you guys are going to be experts with typical development ages 5 through 21. But if we look at how people access their community at ages 6 to 11, okay, think back to when you were in elementary school. How did you get to your friend's house, right? You rode your bike, at least I did growing up in a small town. You walked, you rollerbladed, you'd use scooters, you used skateboards, okay, those kinds of things. So that's how we engage in our community. We also made arrangement with our parents or our friends' parents, right? So I had a bunch of orthodontics done when I was in this particular age group. And so in order to get to my orthodontic appointment, which was in a town an hour away, I had friends that went to the same one. And so we kind of coordinated with the parents who would kind of carpool, right? So again, you're making arrangements with your parents or your friends' parents. Like, Mom, can you please take me to the mall? Those kinds of things. ages 12 to 15 years, you may be riding your bike. I think I rode my bike to and from. I was starting to get a job at that age. So I rode my bike. It was just in the summertime, so that was fine. Or I would wait and kind of get a ride with my dad as he was going to work. Those kinds of things. We kind of coordinated our schedules. You're finding ways around the community. Okay, it may be riding your bike, it may be walking, it may be jogging, it may be using some of the other ones that you used at a younger age. It just kind of depends. But also, the use of public transportation without assistance. And so we're starting to see public transportation here. In my little small town that I grew up in, we did not have public transportation. But most people do not grow up in a small town. And I find that interesting. Students, a lot of students that we have at the University of Mary reside in smaller towns. And so they don't have this exposure to public transportation. You look at New York City, public transportation includes subways, it includes buses, it includes taxis, it includes many other different areas. And so that's something to keep in mind too. So when we look at ages 16 to 21, most of people in this age group spend most of their time outside of home. It may be working, it may be volunteering, it may be spending time with their friends at the mall, shopping, going to their own appointments, going to movies, going to the swimming pool, going to wherever you want to go, I guess. And so they're required to arrange their transportation as well. Again, this particular age, you may be acquiring your driver's license, okay? But again, most people that grow up in like bigger cities may not feel like it's safe for a 16-year-old to take the family car and go downtown, right, for a movie or to go shopping or to hang out with friends. So a lot of these individuals are hopping on public transportation. Okay, so again, we're finding AOTA is recognizing that individuals in more urban areas do use public transportation. And that was really eye-opening for me because, again, I didn't grow up with it. And in our community, here in Bismarck, it's something that's kind of up and coming and evolving. But even where the University of Mary's at, they don't have a route out here. And so even, using public transportation to come to the university every day may not be an option. I know they're talking about getting it, and maybe they are getting it set up. I haven't heard that they have yet. But you go to, some of your other universities, maybe some of you have gone there for your undergrad or you have transferred, and they have university bus systems that take you from one part of campus to the other, those kinds of things. And so that's included with public transportation too. So again, it is typical for people ages 6 to 11 to maybe ride public transportation, whether it be a bus, train, plane, those kinds of things, maybe with their parents, right? But again, you hit that early teen, adolescent, and later teen, they're using this by themselves, and that's considered typical. Personal and contextual influences. So we have to keep in mind when somebody's using or trying to participate in the community, what's their personal interests? What do they prefer? And what is their motivation? And so in your case, Smith, there's a really good chapter on IADL's driving and community participation. And so one of the personal context that was explored had to do with somebody's preference for wanting to go swimming, right? And how they talked about how using that interest to go swimming influenced their preference for a job to work at a swimming pool and fold towels and those sorts of things, and that influenced their motivation to get to their job more independently, which required the use of public transportation. So as an adolescent. And so that was kind of interesting how it can kind of build, right? As an OT, you get somebody's interest, but then you kind of figure out, okay, they have an interest in swimming, so they may prefer a job at a swimming pool. How are they going to get there? And that's going to motivate them to get there. So that's kind of how we keep in mind, okay, well, we want them to engage in the occupation that interests them, and they want to get a job, and they prefer to work in this area, but again, how are they going to get there? So us as OTs, we have to keep in the back of our mind that public transportation piece. Client contexts are important, as you all know. So contexts may be physical, social, cultural, virtual, temporal, and then there's service systems and policies. So when we're looking at maybe public transportation, what's the physical environment like? Okay, you guys are all going to explore the physical environment of public transportation. Preferably I have it set up to use kind of a busing system. What's the social context like? Okay, are you socializing with anybody in that particular environment? Are you socializing with the bus driver? Are you socializing with the person next to you? Are you socializing when you get off the bus? Those kinds of things. Cultural. Okay, I'm asking you to observe maybe the demographics that you're riding public transportation with. Okay, virtual. I know Bismarck has an app, and you can see real time where the buses are at. And so you can access that virtual context to help you be more independent with public transportation and get where you want to go to complete the things that you're interested in. Temporal. So where are you at in the context of your time, of your life? Are you 15 years old and you want to go hang out at the mall with your friends? Are you 21 years old and you have to get to work on time and you can't afford a car yet to take yourself, so you're going to use public transportation? And what are the service systems policies? Okay, we're going to look a little bit on public transportation and how some of their policies change. Okay, so as OTs, we keep their personal context in mind, right? The particular contexts in mind as well, with all those areas. And then how do we evaluate that? How do we assess that? And so we're going to evaluate the person's interests, right? We're going to evaluate the person's contexts in which they're going to have to do the things they're doing. And so we're going to do kind of a chart review or health history, right? Are they in a wheelchair? Do they have fractures? Do they have autism? Do they blah, 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 right? What's their personal lives like? You're going to interview them, find out what their personal interests are also, their motivations, right? Their preferences, what they want to do, what they have to do. Okay, so you're going to get that occupational profile. You may have them do certain questionnaires or checklists, right? Like, what are you interested in? Oh, you're interested in hanging out with your friends, right? I think of the adolescent role assessment kind of checklist thing. You like to go to the mall. You like to go hang out at the movie theater. You like to go swimming. I don't know. So there's certain questionnaires, there's certain checklists. Now that may cue you in that as you're interviewing them, maybe they're 18 years old, maybe they don't live with their parents, or maybe they're at a university, those kinds of things, and they have to get from one end of the campus to the other. Okay, and you find that through interviewing, you find that maybe through their questionnaire or checklist. So how are you going to assess their IADLs? Okay. Your Case-Smith text on page 468, 469 go through specific assessment tools that measure some sort of IADLs, okay, or a variety of IADLs, and they're age specific and those kinds of things. I can tell you the only one I've ever used is the PD, and you guys are all familiar with the PD now, those kinds of things. So I'm going to just throw that out there, that these are out there. The one that caught my eye was the AMPS, which I know you have to have additional training in, but the AMPS was the only one that I noticed looked at transportation. And so again, if you are working in a town and you want to explore public transportation more, and you want an assessment tool or a particular measurement that measures, an AMPS may work. Okay, in my particular practice, I haven't been trained in the AMPS, but my particular practice, what I would do if I had a client who needed to use public transportation, which did occur in a rural setting because they had no means to get home to do a home evaluation, I took that client with me on the particular public transportation, and I did a task analysis. Okay, and so this is where in our public transportation assignment, why I focus heavily on task analysis and observations, because that's how I evaluate and how I assess somebody's ability to engage in IADLs, particularly public transportation, through observations and task analysis. Ironically, AOTA, and this was back in 2012, actually has OT's rule for safe transportation, and I'll try and remember to upload this PDF. I got it right off of the AOTA website. And what is the role of occupational therapy in supporting safe youth transportation? And so it talks about how transportation is an IADL that actually spans birth through adolescence, and we need to include individuals and transportation as a passenger, as a pedestrian, and as a driver. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. So you could look at each and every one of yourselves as a passenger when you're riding with your friends, when you're driving, being independent yourself, as well as when you're walking or running on the street as a pedestrian. Okay, and so as an OT, we need to consider all of that. It may include biking, it may include seating and positioning, it may include using the school bus, pre-driving assessment, specialized driving assessment, and community mobility and public transportation. So that's right off of AOTA, how that's OT's role to look at community mobility and public transportation. This particular PDF goes through a lot of research on how public transportation is actually more safe than getting in your car and going yourself, and how safety is such a huge piece to this. Primarily OT's role, and I'm totally summarizing here, but OT's role for safe transportation when you're looking at early intervention, and that's, birth to 3, is primarily use of car seats, right? Like becoming familiar with the particular child safety laws. I know they change quite regularly. There's infants need to be in a 5-point harness that's rear facing. When they reach a certain weight, they can move to front facing. When they reach a certain weight, they can move to a booster. When they reach a certain weight or height, they can move to the front seat of their car, right? So each, being a passenger in a car, the laws change and vary. And so just to kind of know what that is. This particular PDF goes over how you can become certified as a child passenger safety technician, or they have those quite readily in various areas as well. When they look at car seats, and they oftentimes have car seat checks to make sure that the car seats are installed right, those kinds of things. Considering additional training in transportation with special health needs. Again, the automotive safety program offers a specialized training program called, quote, Safe Travel for All Children. And it's a certification just for OT practitioners who work in hospitals, early intervention programs, schools, or anybody that just wants to learn more about transportation for individuals with special needs. When we move to school-age children, a lot of times school-age children have to ride the bus. And so sometimes OTs can look about, excuse me, assessing school buses safely. There's general school bus safety and safety etiquette, those kinds of things that happen in schools and school buses. If somebody is in a wheelchair, there's certain ways that you have to tie down wheelchairs for safety. It also talked about the OT's role to know about the bus riding experience. In your assignment, it talks about sensory, like what are the sensory experiences you encountered. There's a lot of sensory experiences, and so this particular AOTA says it's important for OTs to be familiar with transportation and to ride the school bus and become familiar with sensory information that may pose challenges for students. And so again, this is why we're having you experience public transportation as well. And then OT's role is to educate, right? It may be educating the bus driver on how to tie down wheelchairs. It may be educating the child on certain techniques that they can do to help with their sensory regulation, those kinds of things. When children reach adolescence, they should be in contact with a transition coordinator, right, who's going to help them transition into adulthood or college or those kinds of things. They may be looked at by driver rehabilitation to do more formal assessments to see, are they capable of driving? Are there certain modifications that could be in place to help them be more safe and independent with driving themselves? And then another aspect is just, or another role is for us to teach community mobility for these adolescents. Because again, typically it is appropriate for adolescents to be riding and using public transportation. So our OT intervention, assessing the community, things to keep in mind, assessing the community enables youth to engage in social participation, right? That's why youth are spending more and more time out of the home, because they're socializing, whether it be with their friends, whether it be with their jobs, whether it be with individuals in the community. They're engaging in social participation. And so safe and effective participation in occupational performance should be the goal for our intervention. It should be what's driving our intervention, to be safe and effective with whatever our occupational performance is. Going back to our models of practice, you'll remember these terms. Remediation, okay, skill acquisition, adaptation compensation, environmental modifications, education, and prevention. And so your assignment has you experience what it's like to ride a bus, okay, public transportation, utilize public transportation. I have you do a task analysis so you know how complicated riding a bus actually is and all of the steps that are associated, all of the body systems that are associated. I have you speculate based on your task analysis, okay, if somebody has a physical limitation such as a broken leg or they're in a wheelchair, how are they going to access public transportation? And then as a therapist, if you have Tommy who's in a wheelchair and they want to be able to go to the sporting event with their friends and they can't get there from their parents, okay, you may be doing an intervention with them on how to access public transportation so they can hang out with their friends. So your interventions that I'm asking for may be associated with how are they going to acquire that skill. So you in therapy, working with Tommy in a wheelchair, what does he need to do? What skills does he need to acquire in order to be successful with public transportation so he can hang out with his friends? Is there anything we can adapt? Or is there anything he can compensate for? Okay? Is there anything that can be modified in the environment? Is there anything that we can provide him with education or anything that we can help him to prevent anything? Okay? Looking at safety, those kinds of things. Again, with cognition. Okay? If we're working with somebody maybe with intellectual impairment, okay? Maybe they have autism. Is there anything that we can adapt to compensate? Is there anything that we can modify? Is there anything that we can provide in the basis of education? Those kinds of things. And so when you're thinking of those particular areas on your rubric, think of, oh, what can I adapt? What can I help them acquire? Is there anything that can be modified? Those kinds of things. And your chapter on IADLs, N.K. Smith does a really good job, or at least cues you in on, use of visual cues, use of adaptive equipment, those kinds of things. It just, you still have to think about it. And again, I want that tied to what you're observing with your task analysis. Specifically looking at public transportation, Bismarck and Billings, you both have a really useful website to go to. I've gone to both of them and I've looked at both of them. Bismarck, there's even a link for Title VI, but it focuses more on non-discrimination policies. So it doesn't really talk about individuals with disabilities so much. Where the Billings side, there's Title VI, and they reference the Americans with Disabilities Act 1990 and how every bus needs to have some level of accessibility. Okay, so that's really cool. The Bismarck side actually shows benefits of using public transportation. There's how to ride tutorials and actually YouTube videos on how to catch a bus, on how to ride a bus, on how to pay, those kinds of things. So even Billings may find that useful to watch those video tutorials. On the Billings side, they have just how to ride. It kind of walks you through it. There isn't videos, but it tells you step by step. There's a link called Tips, and I think that's where it shows you like where your fares are at, those kinds of things. Accessibility, it talks a little bit about accessibility on the billing side. That's kind of an interesting link to kind of read. So Bismarck students, you may find that helpful so you know what's even available on buses. The Bismarck side is really cool because they have, if you look at your routes, they actually have a route app for Apple and Android. And it shows you real-time maps of where your bus is at and those sorts of things that you want to take. And so you can be on your smartphone and you can be alongside the road and you'll know exactly where the bus is at, but you just have to know what bus you're taking, those sorts of things. On the billing side, reading and your route schedule, if you go to that link, reading the route and schedule, it kind of walks you through on how to do that. And looking at a map and everything's color coordinated and those kinds of things. So they're both very, very user friendly. Both very user friendly. And again, you may benefit from kind of cross-referencing. Billings, you may benefit from the how to ride video tutorials. Bismarck, you may benefit from kind of the accessibility piece, those kinds of things. So you're going to have to go to the website to prepare for your using public transportation, those kinds of things. Both very user-friendly sites. Some of the key points that students don't always see when they ride public transportation to know the accessibility features, okay, is the use of ramps, lifts, and kneeling. And so if we take a look in the far right-hand side here, you see that this bus that I'm highlighting, the number 2 on it, is kind of leaning, okay? They call that kneeling. It's a hydraulic type of thing, and the bus driver can push a button, and the bus actually lowers to the end of the curb, okay? So that helps people so they don't have such a step, if they have a hard time doing steps, to step into the bus. Okay, you also see here ramps, and so there's different kinds of ramps per bus, and so you'll see here on this particular bus, I believe it is kneeling, so it gets really, really close to the curb here, and then just a fold-out ramp drops down. Okay, so somebody maybe who's on crutches, they can't really do steps very much, those kinds of things. Maybe somebody in a wheelchair, they have less of an incline if the bus is kneeling, and they can go up the ramp. Okay. Going down here too, so if somebody's in maybe a power wheelchair, or they don't have the ability to get on the bus with just a traditional ramp, some buses do have lifts, okay, where the bus will kneel, they'll roll out the lift for them, they'll have to position themselves on the ramp with the bus, or with the ramp, and then there's kind of a lift that will hydraulically lift them up, and then they can get back onto the bus. So you can kind of see here oh, I thought that was the bus driver. It's probably not the bus driver. Sometimes these lifts are remote control, so the bus driver actually has to get out, make sure that the wheelchair is safely latched into place, so they just don't go rolling off the lift, and then they can access that via remote. And so I can't tell if that's what this is or not. I know some Bismarck buses have that, and the bus driver does that with the remote. Now I say here that policies and places may be different because some places it's a liability issue for the bus driver to actually step outside of the bus and help an individual on a wheelchair get on the bus. And so talking to the Bismarck area public transportation, I was told that the bus driver is not allowed to get out of his seat unless he is latching a wheelchair to a lift or latching a wheelchair into place. And so it's up to the individual to propel themselves, if they're in a wheelchair or if they're on crutches, to propel themselves into the bus and get to propel themselves to the appropriate place for wheelchairs. Every bus should have areas for wheelchairs. Some are hard to spot. So as students have ridden the bus and they've talked to the bus driver, which I was told you're not supposed to talk to the bus driver, but some bus drivers like to talk, and so some students have asked, well, what do you do? And the bus driver says, oh, I help them, it takes less time that way, blah, blah, blah. So again, places may be different. Policies may be in place, they may not necessarily be followed, those kinds of things. And so you just have to ask. Also, you may have to ask to use them, right? Like if you're a pedestrian and you're on crutches and you step up to the bus here, you may say, can you have the bus kneel for me, please? Or if you're in a wheelchair, or maybe you have Parkinson's, right? And this is more for adults, I guess, and you have a hard time doing stairs, you can ask, can you put out the ramp for me? And so again, that education or that awareness piece that these things are in place in public transportation, and have your client advocate for that. A lot of times, like this ramp right here, actually folds up into steps. And so just as an onlooker, you may not even know that there's a ramp there. And so maybe some of your bus drivers, if it's a slow day, maybe they'll show you, maybe they won't, maybe they're very crabby. I've had some students complain, God, the bus driver was so crabby. I asked him and he, started cussing at me, whatever. It is what it is. I can't control that. That's part of your task analysis. And again, places may be different. A couple other things that I think are really important, people with wheelchairs. I have a lot of students who say, well, I would just recommend that they use paratransit or, something like that. Well, paratransit may not get there, or paratransit may be more expensive. Why not look at public transportation when there's things like ADA, when there's things like these accessibility options in place to be available? Sometimes paratransit's only available certain times of the day. And public transportation runs 24/7. I think it's the opposite here in Bismarck. I'm not sure about Billings, but I know Billings has a similar thing. So here's some things to keep in mind. Again, if you go to Minneapolis, you go to bigger cities, they may not have options for people in wheelchairs other than public transportation. Couple things I want to point out. In this particular bus, again, here's a ramp, right? It electrically or hydraulically goes down. These seats have to be pushed up, okay? And so the bus driver may have to give that assistance. Again, that's going to depend on the place. It may even depend on the bus driver. But the bus driver is the one that has to modify the interior, okay? So if there are people on a wheelchair, he's going to have to go and lift up these seats. He's the one that's going to go and he's going to have to make sure that the wheelchair is strapped down. Okay. Here's a picture on some straps that should be kind of anchored down to the floor and how they are positioned. How people are positioned for their safety if they're in a wheelchair. I'm not sure if you'll always be able to see this when you're riding a public transportation, because again, if the seats are pushed down, you may not see that. I've had some bus drivers where students have asked, and the bus driver's like, oh yeah, it's right here. All I have to do is push this and do this, and then this is where the straps are at. They're very informative, and I've had other bus drivers that are like, I'm not wasting my time to show you that. You don't need it. You're not in a wheelchair. So, do with it as you will. I did put in a little YouTube clip here on somebody with a wheelchair, how they get in and out of the bus, that sort of thing. It's really neat. At the very, very, very beginning, the bus lowers and does that kneeling. So it's just kind of interesting. Other accessibility tips that I know is out there that sometimes students don't recognize, going up the steps, there are handrails, right? So if people have trouble doing the stairs, there's always the handrails. There's the vertical poles or maybe the handles that people can hang on to. So if they have very poor core strength or stability, they may be able to use those poles. You'll probably all find that the bus is bouncy. They take those corners fast, and if you have poor oblique muscles or poor core strength, you may be on the other person's lap sitting next to you. Yellow ropes for stopping. So the directions for riding a bus, you have to pull that lever, right? Pull that string that's above your head. Well, if somebody doesn't have shoulder range of motion, maybe they have arthritis, maybe they had rotator cuff, maybe they just have CP and muscle tone issues, there's actually some yellow vertical ropes that hang down so people don't have to reach so high. Again, looking at modification or looking at adaptive equipment, if they can't reach it, can you give them a dressing stick so they can reach that and they take that with them on their public transportation, okay? Also, if you get a transfer ticket, at least here in Bismarck, I'm not sure about Billings, the corner is dog-eared, and so meaning that it's just cut off. It's not a sharp edge. And I was told the reason for that is people who are visually impaired, they have to put the ticket in a certain way into the slot, like the change, that kind of thing. And so that ticket is dog-eared specifically so they know what direction to put the ticket into the slot. So there's a lot of many different accessibility tips in place for you. And I'm curious what else you find. These are just a few that students sometimes have a hard time recognizing that I really wanted to point out. So I get a lot of questions from students that say, how does this tie into 432? How this ties into 432 is we go into typical development of individuals ages 5 or 6 on up to 21. And so you'll see in our Case-Smith book and kind of what we've talked about with typical development that public transportation is a big piece to this. Public transportation is a big piece because in other areas, in big cities, those sorts of things, it's that public transportation that keeps individuals with disabilities connected to their communities. There's all these accessibility features on this public transportation, right? And so research has shown that individuals with both physical disabilities, cognitive disabilities, are spending more time at home and not getting out in their community. Yet we have public transportation systems that are supposed to be accommodating and accessible, and still people just don't know about it, people aren't using it. And so again, AOTA is pushing us to say, hey, we want people to be aware of this. The actual accreditation standard reads, provide recommendations and training techniques to enhance community mobility, including public transportation, community access, and issues related to driver rehabilitation. And so again, it's a specific accreditation factor that we have to meet, which is why we have a specific assignment for you. I do accept assignments, if you experience public transportation in Rome, if you experience public transportation on a vacation in New York City and you want to do the subway or a tram or something like that, as long as you can complete the task analysis so you remember it in that amount of detail, and you can figure it out, and you can complete all the aspects of the assignments or of the assignment, I'm perfectly okay with that. So you do not have to access Billings Transportation or Bismarck if you have other public transportation experience. You can rely on that. The other question I get a lot is how has this impacted my practice? Because you don't think of OTs in public transportation. Well, here's the thing. Again, working with, even in a skilled nursing facility, right? The rural area I had a transportation program for people with disabilities. And so I had to work on transfers to get in and out of this vehicle so that we could go and do a home evaluation to see if it was appropriate to discharge home. Well, we had to get there somehow, right? Family couldn't access them or couldn't help them because the people were in a wheelchair and they only had a car. And so we had to access this public transportation and those kinds of things. So also working in an outpatient clinic, right? I had to make sure that people were able to get to my appointments. In outpatient, they came to me, right? Well, if they can't come to me, are they going to access that health care? So again, if we go back to the beginning of this PowerPoint, decreased access to health care, people with physical disabilities. Well, if there's public transportation available for them and they know how to use it and they can be independent in using it, that should increase their ability to take care of themselves and access their overall health. So I do see very valid reasons for this assignment, and I do understand and I see, even if you work in a rural area, the importance of it. I had a student come back from, I think it was it Rapid City or Sioux Falls, and they had an OT who specialized in public transportation and did like formal evaluations and stuff like that for the public transportation office and stuff. So that may be, one of you in the future as well. And so now you can access this PowerPoint and kind of take a look at some things and some assessments, those sorts of things. Personally, my experience with public transportation that I like to share, and why I push for your independence on accessing the information online. Because when I was a fieldwork student, I had dreams of moving to Hawaii. I actually had a friend that lived there, and so I went down and I stayed with my friend. So I would go from place to place. And since she worked 3 jobs, she took a vehicle, and I either had to ride a bike or take a bus. So I would take a bus. The bus system there was very easy. Nothing was online, though, at that time. So I had to access things via map and go to an office and get stuff, or the grocery store. And so you may find public transportation maps and those kinds of things in your communities also. But anyway, so I went without really researching stuff on when the bus quit, and I accessed the Polynesian Cultural Center. So I got on the bus and I went, clear across the island. Went to the Polynesian Cultural Center, which is kind of like a touristy thing where you watch like a luau and have like a community dining experience, and it's kind of a big tourist trap thing. I'm waiting at the bus stop, and I'm waiting there, and then I see a sign that said bus stops, or the last bus is at 8 p.m. Well, the show got over at 9 p.m. So had I researched maybe a little bit more thoroughly, I would have known that. And so I was stuck there. It was dark. It was my last night before coming home. And I had to just take off walking in my flip-flops and my Polynesian Cultural Center handbag that had some souvenirs in it. And so I followed, the road, and I ended up on the freeway, and then I went the wrong way on the freeway. I'm walking on the freeway, and then there's cops there, and they start pulling people out of the car, and they start frisking them, and there's a lot of profanity, and I can't really get around them because they're pulled over onto the side of the road, and if I went around them, there was like a big cliff, because there's mountains in Hawaii. So I start kind of scaling down this cliff, hanging on to the ledge, and there's cops yelling above me, and people, from what I gathered, it was drug related, and so I'm scouring here, hoping they're not seeing me because it's really dark, and it was so awkward. And then I'm scaling back up the cliff, on the other side of their car, and I'm walking. I trip on something, and I skin my knees, and I look, and it's a huge snail about as big as my fist. So yeah, I tripped on a snail. My knees are bleeding, my hands are bleeding, and then I see Honolulu, and I'm like, I'm not staying in Honolulu, I'm staying in Kaneohe. And so I went the wrong way walking on the freeway, and so I had to go back again, and they were still frisking these people and putting them in handcuffs by the time I had to walk back again. Needless to say, a minivan pulled over, huge guy, right? Huge guy, and he pulls over and he rolls down his window, and he looked like he was Hawaiian, and I was told that Hawaiians aren't too fond of outsiders, right? And so I'm a little scared, and he goes, "Dude, you're lost. Get in, I'll give you a ride. Where are you headed?" And I'm like, I'm looking down the street, or the freeway, I'm looking down the freeway, and I'm like, do I scale the cliff again and go by the cops in this really scary situation? Do I continue walking? Am I going in the right way? I don't know where I'm going. And then I looked down at my bloody knees and my bloody hands, and it was the end of my trip. I was in between field work, so I had absolutely no money. I think I had $20 in my pocket, and I looked over and I'm like, what's the worst that's going to happen? I'm already bloody. I'm already, he's going to take my souvenirs. he could probably have my souvenirs. You know, he's going to take my 20 bucks, whatever. So I hopped in the van, and he actually drove me to my friend's street. And it turns out he was from Grand Forks, North Dakota, and he was there for military. And so I'm from North Dakota, and so what are the odds that I get lost in Hawaii and the person that picked me up was from North Dakota also and probably saved my life? I'd probably still be there walking and wandering. Hopefully not. But anyway, he was literally my guardian angel, that's for sure. So I'm passionate that you guys have more tools than what I had regarding the internet, regarding user-friendly apps, those kinds of things. And so I want you to take the initiative to kind of explore a little bit and then follow the guidelines on the assignment. And if you have questions regarding training techniques or interventions, feel free to let me know. There's more and more evidence out there on what OTs do and what their recommendations are, so I encourage you to use your library resources and look for journal articles and those kinds of things. But, you know, if you get stumped, please let me know. These are hard to grade. And so I appreciate when students kind of shoot me a question and they're like, okay, well, this is what I did in my task analysis, but you know, I've never worked with anybody with a disability before, so, you know, what do you think? Am I on the right track? Those kinds of things. So just know that I'm open to that. I'm rambling. Anyways, again, if you have questions for the purpose of this assignment or those kinds of things, also please let me know, because I just find students do a better job if they understand the importance and the purpose behind this. All right, thank you.